The morning sunlight streamed through the gaps in the blinds, painting golden lines on the walls of the apartment where Chloe Lennox stood at the counter, absently stirring her coffee. The faint aroma of roasted beans filled the air, mingling with the hum of the city waking outside. It should have been comforting, a ritual grounding her day. Instead, her mind swirled with unease. Across the room, her husband, Ethan, sat hunched over his laptop. The soft clicks of the keyboard punctuated the silence, his face lit by the screen's glow. Chloe glanced at him, her gaze lingering on his profile, the way his brow furrowed when he was lost in concentration. His lips pursed in that familiar way she used to find endearing. But now it seemed distant, almost mechanical. "Big day ahead?" she asked, breaking the quiet. Ethan grunted in response, his fingers never pausing. "Yeah, finalizing the pitch for the new investor group. Sounds intense." She sipped her coffee, the warmth doing little to soothe the growing chill in her chest. Their conversations had become like this lately, terse, perfunctory, lacking the connection they once shared. Ethan finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment. "What about you? Any exciting plans today?" Chloe hesitated. She had plenty to say. Questions about the late nights, the hushed phone calls she wasn't meant to overhear, the faint trace of unfamiliar perfume on his jacket last week. But instead, she forced a smile. "Just the usual. Errands, a yoga class later." "Great," he replied, already turning back to his screen. As he typed away, Chloe watched him, searching for traces of the man she married 6 years ago. There were moments when the past felt close enough to touch. Weekends spent laughing in bed, impromptu road trips, the way he'd once looked at her like she was his entire world. But those memories were now ghosts, haunting her with their absence. The first real crack had appeared a few months ago, subtle yet undeniable. Ethan had come home late from work, his tie loosened, and his energy frenetic. When Chloe asked about his day, he'd mumbled something about last-minute meetings, but his phone vibrated constantly that night, and when he stepped into the hallway to answer a call, Chloe couldn't help but listen. The tone of his voice, low, conspiratorial, sent a shiver down her spine. Now, standing in their sunlit kitchen, the weight of those moments pressed down on her. She set her mug down, the porcelain clinking softly against the counter. "I'm heading out," she said, grabbing her keys. Ethan muttered a distracted goodbye. As she walked down the bustling street, Chloe's thoughts raced. Her yoga mat felt heavier than usual slung over her shoulder, a symbol of the balance she desperately sought in a world that seemed to be unraveling. She needed clarity, something tangible to make sense of the creeping doubts that refused to leave her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her best friend, Lila. "Coffee later? Spill everything." For PM, Chloe's fingers hovered over the keyboard before she replied, "See you then." The coffee shop was bustling when Chloe arrived, the scent of freshly brewed espresso mingling with the sound of chatter and clinking ceramic cups. Lila was already there, her long auburn hair tied up in a messy bun, a scarf draped loosely around her neck. She waved Chloe over, a bright smile dimming as she noticed the tension in her friend's face. "Hey, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world," Lila said, pushing a latte toward Chloe as she slid into the seat opposite. "Feels like it," Chloe admitted, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. The steam curled upward, but its comfort couldn't ease the ache in her chest. "I don't know, Lila. Things with Ethan. They're not right." Lila raised an eyebrow, concern flashing in her green eyes. "Not right how? You guys have been the golden couple since college. Everyone says so." Chloe gave a bitter laugh. "Everyone except me, apparently." She stared into her latte, the creamy foam swirling aimlessly. "He's been distant for months. Late nights, secretive phone calls. And last week, there was perfume on his jacket. Not mine." Lila sucked in a breath, setting her cup down with a sharp clink. "Perfume? Chloe, you don't think—" "I don't know what to think." Chloe's voice cracked, and she took a shaky sip of her drink to steady herself. I've tried to rationalize it. Work stress, maybe I'm imagining things, but it doesn't add up. He's not the same. Have you asked him about it? Lila leaned forward, her tone gentle but insistent. Chloe shook her head. Not directly. What would I even say? Hey, honey, why do you smell like another woman? He'd deny it or brush it off like he always does. He's so good at that, making me feel crazy for noticing. Gaslighting, Lila said grimly. Classic move if he's hiding something. You can't let him do that to you. But what if I'm wrong? Chloe's voice wavered, the vulnerability cutting through her usual composure. What if this is all in my head? Lila reached across the table, placing a hand over Chloe's. Then you find out for sure. You deserve the truth, even if it. Chloe bit her lip, nodding. The thought of confrontation terrified her, but the weight of uncertainty was unbearable. You're right, she said finally. I need to know. That night, Chloe waited until Ethan was asleep before slipping out of bed. She moved silently, her heartbeat thundering in her ears as she retrieved his phone from the bedside table. The screen glowed faintly in the dark, asking for the passcode. She hesitated, biting her lip. 6 years together. She should know this. Her fingers hovered over the numbers before entering his birthday. The phone unlocked. Her stomach twisted as she navigated to his messages. Most were innocuous, work-related, group chats with friends. But one thread stood out. No name, just a heart emoji as the contact. Chloe's blood ran cold. She opened it, her hands trembling. The messages painted a picture she dreaded but couldn't ignore. Miss you already. Yesterday was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. Counting down the days. The most recent message, from that afternoon, sent a knife straight through her chest. I'll make up an excuse to leave after the pitch tomorrow. Meet me at the hotel. Usual room. Chloe dropped the phone onto the bed, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. She stared at Ethan's sleeping form, his face peaceful and utterly untroubled by the storm raging inside her. The next day, Chloe was a woman on a mission. She'd canceled her yoga class and called in sick to work, her mind consumed by a singular focus, uncovering the truth. She'd texted Lila after leaving the coffee shop, and her friend's response had been immediate and supportive. I've got a friend who's a PI, discreet, professional. Do you want his number? Now Chloe sat in a small, nondescript office across from a man named Marcus. He was older, with a calm demeanor that radiated competence. His piercing blue eyes studied her carefully as she recounted her suspicions. I know it sounds cliché, she finished, her voice shaking. The late nights, the distance, I just need to know. Marcus nodded, jotting down notes. You're not alone, Mrs. Lennox. These things happen more often than people realize. If your husband is involved in something, I'll find out. Chloe swallowed hard, gripping her purse tightly. Thank you. As she left the office, a sense of resolve began to take hold. It wasn't the same as hope. Hope implied a happy ending. This was something different, a determination to reclaim control over her life, no matter what she discovered. Late that evening, Ethan arrived home, his tie askew and his eyes weary. Chloe greeted him at the door, forcing a smile that felt brittle. Tough day? She asked as he shrugged off his coat. Yeah, he muttered, but we're almost there. If this investor deal goes through, everything changes. She nodded, her mind racing. I was thinking, maybe we could plan a weekend away soon, just the two of us. Reconnect. Ethan hesitated, his face carefully neutral. That sounds nice. Let's talk about it after the pitch. Chloe watched him head upstairs, her smile fading. The lie sat between them like a physical presence, thickening the air. But now she had an ally in Marcus, and soon the lie would unravel. As she prepared for bed, Chloe caught her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were sharper, her expression harder than it had been just days ago. Whatever the truth turned out to be, she promised herself one thing. Ethan wouldn't get to decide her future. She would. 2 days passed with a tense normalcy that felt like walking a tightrope. Chloe went about her routine, running errands, attending yoga, and making small talk with Ethan over dinner, all while waiting for Marcus to contact her. Each moment stretched unbearably, the silence of their home amplifying the unease bubbling beneath the surface. It wasn't until Thursday afternoon that her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Need to meet. Findings are substantial. My office. 4 p.m. Chloe's hands trembled as she replied. Substantial. The word reverberated in her chest like a warning bell. At precisely 4 p.m., Chloe pushed open the glass door to Marcus's office, the sterile scent of paper and faint traces of aftershave filling the air. Marcus stood to greet her, his expression professional but tinged with something else. Pity. Mrs. Lennox, thank you for coming. He gestured for her to sit before handing her a folder. Everything's in here. Surveillance photos, dates, times, and the identity of the other party. Chloe opened the folder slowly, her stomach in knots. The first photo hit her like a slap. Ethan, standing in the doorway of a luxury hotel, his hand resting on the small of a woman's back. She was blonde, willowy, the type of woman who looked like she belonged in a magazine spread rather than the messy realities of life. More photos followed, Ethan and the woman sharing a laugh over coffee, their heads leaning intimately close. Ethan leaving her apartment building late at night. Each image was a new wound, each timestamp another piece of the betrayal falling into place. She's a coworker, Marcus said, his voice steady. Angela Price, marketing executive at the firm where your husband works. From what I could gather, this has been ongoing for about 5 months. Chloe's mind reeled. 5 months. While she had been worrying, doubting herself, questioning every change in Ethan's behavior, he had been building another life with someone else. Do you want me to continue monitoring him? Marcus asked gently. Chloe closed the folder, her jaw tight. No, she said firmly. I've seen enough. That evening, Chloe sat in her car in their driveway, the engine idling as she gripped the steering wheel. The house loomed ahead, its warm light spilling out through the windows. It had always felt like a sanctuary, but now it was a prison of lies and broken promises. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A text from Ethan. Running late. Don't wait up for dinner. The words were infuriatingly familiar. She had lost count of how many times he had sent her some variation of that message, each one a carefully crafted excuse to hide his double life. Chloe stared at the text, her anger boiling over. Without thinking, she typed a reply. Take your time. I'll be here when you're ready to be honest. Ethan came home later than usual, the smell of whiskey clinging to his breath as he stepped into the living room. Chloe was waiting for him, sitting on the couch with the folder from Marcus open in her lap. What's all this? Ethan asked, his voice cautious as he shrugged off his coat. Chloe met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. Evidence. Evidence. He forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. What are you talking about? She held up one of the photos, Ethan and Angela exiting the hotel together. Does this jog your memory? The color drained from his face. Chloe, I can explain. No. She cut him off, her voice cold and sharp. You don't get to explain. I've been explaining away your behavior for months. The late nights, the secrecy, the lies. But this. She threw the photo onto the coffee table. This doesn't need an explanation. Ethan's shoulders slumped, the pretense of denial evaporating. I never wanted it to be like this, he said quietly. Chloe laughed bitterly. And yet here we are. She stood, pacing the room as her anger spilled over. Do you have any idea what it's been like? Second-guessing myself every day, wondering if I'm losing my mind, while you're off playing house with her. It wasn't about her, Ethan said, his voice desperate. It was about everything else. The pressure, the expectations. Don't you dare blame me for this, Chloe snapped, whirling to face him. You had choices. You could have talked to me. We could have worked through whatever was wrong. but instead you chose to destroy everything we built. Ethan looked down, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. I didn't mean to hurt you. Chloe's voice softened, a deep sadness replacing her fury. But you did. And now, I don't know if there's anything left to save. Chloe spent that night in the guest bedroom, lying awake as the weight of the confrontation settled over her. The hurt was overwhelming, but beneath it was a growing resolve. She wouldn't be a victim in her own life. The next morning, Ethan was gone by the time she came downstairs. His absence was a relief, giving her space to think clearly for the first time in weeks. She picked up her phone and dialed Lila. It's over, she said when her friend answered. I'm so sorry, Lila replied, her voice thick with emotion. What can I do? Chloe took a deep breath. Help me figure out my next step, because one thing was certain. She couldn't stay here, in this house, with these memories. It was time to take control of her life and write a new chapter, one where she wasn't defined by Ethan's betrayal, but by her own strength. Chloe's world shifted in the days following her confrontation with Ethan. The routines she once relied on, the quiet mornings over coffee, the evening dinners at the kitchen table, were now relics of a life she no longer recognized. Each passing day carried a sense of unease, but also the glimmer of a newfound purpose. Lila was true to her word, helping Chloe navigate the uncharted territory of separating from Ethan. They met at a cafe downtown, their conversation tinged with both sadness and determination. You can't keep living in that house, Lila said, her voice firm as she stirred her tea. It's filled with ghosts. You'll never move forward if you're surrounded by the past. Chloe nodded, tracing the rim of her cup. I know. Feels like admitting defeat. It's not defeat, Lila countered. It's taking back control. You need a fresh start. The thought lingered as Chloe left the cafe. She found herself wandering into the heart of the city, where the streets hummed with energy. The idea of starting over was daunting, but with every step, it began to feel less like an ending and more like a beginning. That night, Chloe sat alone in the dim light of the living room, a legal pad balanced on her knees. Her pen hovered over the page as she began to list everything she needed to do. Find a new place to live, talk to a lawyer, close the joint accounts, decide what to do with the house. The thought of confronting Ethan again filled her with dread, but it was unavoidable. He would be home soon, and she couldn't delay the conversation any longer. When the sound of his key turning in the lock broke the silence, Chloe's stomach twisted. Ethan entered, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. He paused when he saw her sitting on the couch, the legal pad in her lap. We need to talk, Chloe said, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. Ethan sighed, setting his briefcase down. I figured we would. Let me just... No, she interrupted. Now. He hesitated, then nodded, taking a seat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence thick with unspoken words. I'm leaving, Chloe said finally. Ethan's head shot up, his eyes wide with alarm. What? Chloe, wait. I've made my decision, she continued, cutting him off. This marriage is over. I've already started looking for a new place, and I'll have a lawyer draw up the papers. Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. Chloe, please, don't do this. We can fix it. I'll go to counseling. I'll end things with Angela. I already have. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Her chest tightened at his words. For a brief, flickering moment, she wanted to believe him. But the damage was too deep, the trust shattered beyond repair. I can't, she said softly. You didn't just hurt me, Ethan. You broke us. And I don't think there's a way back. Ethan's face crumpled, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. I'm so sorry, he whispered. Chloe stood, clutching the legal pad to her chest like a shield. I hope you mean that, for your sake. But it doesn't change what's happened. She left him there, sitting in the dim light of their once shared living room, and retreated to the guest bedroom. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. Over the next week, Chloe threw herself into the task of dismantling her old life. She met with a lawyer, who assured her the divorce proceedings could be straightforward if Ethan didn't contest the terms. She found a small but charming apartment in the city, a far cry from the suburban home she had shared with Ethan, but it felt right, like a clean slate. Packing was both cathartic and excruciating. Each item she boxed up carried a memory, a reminder of what she had lost. She sorted through everything with a brutal efficiency, keeping only what she truly needed and leaving the rest behind. On her final night in the house, Chloe stood in the empty living room, the echoes of laughter and arguments still ringing faintly in her mind. She ran her fingers along the mantel, where photos of happier times had once stood, before turning away and locking the door behind her for the last time. Lila helped Chloe settle into her new apartment, their laughter filling the small space as they unpacked boxes and arranged furniture. For the first time in weeks, Chloe felt a sense of lightness, as if the weight of her old life was finally lifting. "This place has potential," Lila said, flopping onto the couch with a satisfied sigh. "It's got that cozy, bohemian vibe you've always liked." Chloe smiled, glancing around the room. The mismatched furniture and eclectic decor were a stark contrast to the meticulously curated aesthetic of her old home, but it felt authentic, felt like her. As the days turned into weeks, Chloe began to rebuild. She returned to yoga with renewed focus, finding solace in the steady rhythm of her breath and the strength of her body. She reconnected with friends she had drifted from, filling her calendar with dinners, gallery visits, and long walks through the city. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to find herself again. One evening, as Chloe sat on her balcony watching the city lights twinkle like stars, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "I hope you're doing well. I'm sorry for everything. I wish things had been different." She stared at the message for a long time, the emotions it stirred both painful and bittersweet. Finally, she typed a simple response. "I wish they had been too. Take care." As she set her phone aside, Chloe realized that for the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. Her journey was far from over, but she was finally moving forward. One step, one breath, one moment at a time. The days after Detective Wallace's call passed in a haze. Chloe couldn't shake the weight of Angela Price's death or the cold, heavy implication that Ethan was somehow involved. Questions spun in her mind: was he capable of murder? Or had his affair drawn him into something far more sinister? By Friday, the unanswered questions became unbearable. Sitting in her living room, surrounded by the remnants of her old life, Chloe opened the folder Marcus had given her, hoping for clarity. Her eyes scanned the photos and surveillance notes, her chest tightening as familiar patterns emerged. And then she saw it. In one of the photos, Ethan and Angela were seated at an outdoor cafe. A man in a black coat sat a few tables behind them, his face obscured by sunglasses. She flipped to another image, this one taken outside Angela's apartment. The same man lingered on the corner, smoking a cigarette. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was Marcus. "I was just about to call you," Chloe said, holding the photo closer. "I think there's someone following Ethan and Angela. A man in a black coat. He's in multiple pictures." "That's why I'm calling," Marcus said grimly. "I ran facial recognition on him. His name is Daniel Price, Angela's brother. He has a violent criminal record, and there's a history of tension between him and Angela. Do you think he killed her?" Chloe whispered. "It's possible," Marcus said. "But Chloe, there's something else. Daniel wasn't just following Angela and Ethan. He's been seen near your new apartment." The words sent a chill through her. "Near me? Why?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But I think you need to be careful." Chloe's grip on the phone tightened. Her heart raced as she stared at the photo of Daniel in the cafe. She had escaped Ethan's lies, but the shadow of his choices had followed her. At dawn the next morning, Chloe's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old park. 6 a.m. Come alone. The sight of Ethan's initial made her stomach twist. He was still missing, still the center of a growing storm. She debated ignoring the message, but something in her gut told her this was important. By the time she arrived at the park, the sky was awash in pale pink and gold. The air was cool, the paths deserted. She clutched her phone tightly, scanning the trees for any sign of him. "Chloe!" A voice called softly. She turned to see Ethan emerging from the shadows. He looked disheveled, his face gaunt, his clothes rumpled and dirty. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. "What the hell is going on, Ethan?" Chloe demanded, keeping her distance. "Angela is dead, you're missing, and the police think you're involved." Ethan stepped closer, his hands raised as if to show he meant no harm. "I didn't kill her," he said, his voice trembling. "But her brother, Daniel, he's dangerous. He blames me for everything. He's been following me, threatening me." Chloe's breath hitched. "Why would he blame you?" Ethan hesitated, then said, "Because of the money. Angela found out that the company was involved in embezzlement. She was going to blow the whistle and I tried to talk her out of it. Daniel must have thought I convinced her to betray him. He's obsessed with their family's name." Chloe stared at him, a mix of anger and disbelief coursing through her. "So you were protecting the company? Protecting yourself?" "I didn't want to hurt anyone," Ethan said desperately. "I thought I could fix it. But now Angela's dead, and Daniel won't stop until he gets revenge." A sharp crack echoed through the air. Chloe barely registered the sound before Ethan stumbled, a red stain spreading across his chest. "Ethan!" she screamed, rushing to his side as he collapsed to the ground. From the treeline, a figure emerged. Daniel Price. He wore the same black coat as in the photos, his face twisted with rage. "This is your fault," he snarled, raising the gun again. Chloe froze, her hands pressed against Ethan's wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. "Daniel, stop. He didn't kill Angela." Daniel's hand trembled, his aim unsteady. "She wouldn't have died if it weren't for him. He turned her against me, against our family." "You don't understand," Chloe said, her voice shaking. "Angela wasn't going to betray you. She was trying to do the right thing. Killing Ethan won't fix anything." The sound of sirens cut through the tense silence. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees, and Daniel turned to run, disappearing into the woods just as the police arrived. Ethan survived the shooting, though he remained in critical condition. Chloe stayed at the hospital, not out of love but out of a need for answers. When he regained consciousness, he finally told her everything. "Angela wasn't just my lover," Ethan admitted weakly. "She was working with me to cover up the company's crimes. But she started having second thoughts. She wanted to come clean. And Daniel found out," Chloe said, piecing it together. "He thought you were manipulating her." Ethan nodded, his face pale. "I didn't kill her, Chloe, but I didn't stop her from getting involved with people who could. I thought I could control the situation. I was wrong." Chloe stared at him, her anger giving way to a deep, hollow disappointment. "You've destroyed so many lives, Ethan. Angela's, Daniel's, and now your own. Was it worth it?" Ethan didn't answer. In the following weeks, Daniel was captured and charged with Angela's murder. The investigation into the company revealed a web of corruption far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Ethan became a key witness, but his cooperation didn't absolve him of his own crimes. For Chloe, the revelations were a painful vindication. She had spent years doubting her instincts, but now the truth was undeniable. On her final visit to Ethan, she stood over his hospital bed, her voice steady. "You destroyed everything we had, but you don't get to destroy me." Months later, Chloe sat on the balcony of her new apartment, the city lights twinkling around her. She had started therapy, resumed yoga, and even taken up painting, small steps toward healing. But as she sipped her wine and gazed at the skyline, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Chloe," a familiar voice rasped. Her blood ran cold. "Daniel, I told you," he said, his tone chilling. "This isn't over." The line went dead, leaving Chloe staring into the darkness, her heart pounding as she realized her past wasn't finished with her after all. The truth revealed the intrigue that had lingered throughout the story was the shadowy presence of Daniel Price, whose obsession with family honor and revenge drove the events from the background. Though Angela's death and Ethan's betrayal seemed like the culmination of chaos, Daniel's chilling final call revealed a more sinister truth. The danger wasn't gone. It was only beginning. Chloe didn't sleep after Daniel's call. She sat on her couch, her hands trembling as she replayed his words in her mind. "This isn't over." It echoed like a sinister promise, sending a shiver down her spine. The police assured her Daniel was in custody. Detective Wallace himself confirmed it, his tone confident. But Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's influence extended beyond his physical presence. Whether through sheer paranoia or something darker, her instincts told her the danger wasn't gone. Over the next few days, her unease grew. Small, seemingly insignificant things began to feel like warnings. The shadowy figure she noticed in the corner of her yoga class, the car that parked just a little too long outside her apartment building, the anonymous text messages that read, "How's your new life?" She changed her routine, leaving work at odd hours and taking different routes home. Lila offered to let her stay at her place, but Chloe declined. She wouldn't let fear dictate her life. Not again. Still, the tension was suffocating. Late one night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed. She bolted upright, her heart pounding as she reached for it. The message was from an unknown number. "Turn on the news." Her hands shook as she grabbed the remote, fumbling with the buttons. The screen flickered to life, showing a breaking news segment. "Daniel Price," the reporter said, her tone urgent, "escaped custody earlier this evening during a prison transport. Police are conducting an active manhunt and urge the public to remain vigilant. He is considered extremely dangerous." The room spun. Chloe's breath came in short gasps as the implications set in. Daniel was free. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her attention back to the screen. "Miss me yet?" The next morning, Chloe met with Detective Wallace at the precinct, her hands gripping her coffee cup so tightly she feared it might shatter. "Are you sure the texts are from Daniel?" Wallace asked, his expression grim. "I'm sure," Chloe replied, her voice trembling. "He knows things. Details he couldn't know unless he was watching me." Wallace nodded, jotting down notes. "We'll increase patrols near your apartment and assign an officer to your case. In the meantime, I recommend staying with someone you trust." Chloe hesitated. The thought of burdening Lila or anyone else made her stomach turn. But the alternative, facing Daniel alone, was far worse. That night, she packed a small bag and drove to Lila's house. The familiarity of her friend's home, with its cozy furniture and warm lighting, offered a temporary sense of safety. "You're staying as long as you need," Lila insisted, setting a mug of tea in front of her. No arguments. Chloe nodded gratefully, but her nerves remained on edge. Even surrounded by comfort, the feeling of being watched lingered. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. 2 days after Daniel's escape, Marcus called with a lead. "I've been digging into Daniel's history," he said. "Turns out he's been using a fake identity to lease a property not far from your old neighborhood." Chloe's stomach dropped. "You're saying he's been living nearby this whole time?" "It gets worse," Marcus continued. "The lease was signed months before Angela's death. He might have been watching her, and Ethan, for longer than we thought." The revelation sent a cold shiver down Chloe's spine. If Daniel had been planning this for months, she was dealing with someone far more methodical and dangerous than she'd realized. The police raided the property that evening. Chloe waited anxiously for news, her phone clutched in her hand. When Wallace finally called, his tone was grim. "We found the house," he said. "It was empty, but Daniel left behind evidence that he's been monitoring you, and others, for a long time." Chloe's blood ran cold. "Others?" Wallace hesitated. We believe he's been targeting individuals connected to Angela's case. Ethan, obviously, but also co-workers at the company and witnesses who testified about the family. And me, Chloe said flatly. Yes, Wallace admitted. You're a central figure in this, Ms. Lennox. He blames you for exposing the truth about Angela and Ethan. What do I do? She asked, her voice cracking. We're doing everything we can to locate him, Wallace assured her. In the meantime, stay vigilant. Don't go anywhere alone. Despite the precautions, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was always one step ahead. Her paranoia escalated with each passing day, her nerves fraying under the weight of constant fear. It all came to a head one rainy night. Chloe was driving back from Lila's after running errands when she noticed the headlights in her rearview mirror. The car had been following her for the last 10 minutes, mirroring every turn she made. Her pulse quickened as she sped up, taking a sharp detour onto a side street. The headlights followed. Panic surged through her veins. She pulled into an empty parking lot, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her phone. But before she could dial, the car screeched to a halt behind her. A figure stepped out, silhouetted against the rain and the dim glow of the streetlights. Daniel. Chloe's heart pounded as he approached her car. She threw it into reverse, but he was too fast, slamming his hands against the hood. Get out! He shouted, his voice muffled by the rain. Chloe's mind raced. If she got out, she was at his mercy. If she stayed, she was trapped. Suddenly, the wail of sirens cut through the downpour. Red and blue lights illuminated the scene as police cars skidded into the lot. Officers surrounded Daniel, weapons drawn. He raised his hands slowly, his face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Chloe, he shouted as they cuffed him. You don't know the whole truth. In the aftermath, Chloe sat in Detective Wallace's office, her hands trembling as she recounted the encounter. What did he mean? She asked. What truth? Wallace frowned, sifting through a folder. We're still piecing it together, but we found something at the property he was using. Financial records linking Angela to someone higher up in Ethan's company. Chloe's stomach turned. Higher up? Wallace nodded. It's possible Angela's death wasn't just about family. It might have been a cover-up for something much bigger. As Chloe left the precinct, the weight of the revelations pressed down on her. Daniel was in custody, but the threads of the mystery stretched far beyond him. The company, the corruption, the deaths, and Chloe was at the center of it all. She couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't truly gone, that somewhere in the shadows, someone was still watching, waiting to strike again. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning.